Could have sworn I hit the play button there. Hey, everybody. There we go. Good evening, Chris. Hey, Martin. Hey, Kathy, Timothy, and Laura. Good evening. Hey, Emily. Hey, Amy. Hey, Jeff. Hey, Becky, and Georgia, and Betsy, Marine, Kathleen. Becky and Betsy, Marine, and Kathleen. Hey, Renee and Sue. Hey, Donna. Hey, Bob. Hey, Dirk. And hey, Morris. Welcome along. Hey, Electra. Hey, Chris and Mary. I'm seeing some new names out there. Hey, Adam and Laura. Welcome along, everybody. Hey, Eric and Tammy and Wendy. Welcome, everybody. Kristen, you're just starting on the crock pot now? It's like 8 o'clock Central. Hey, Sarah. Hey, Nina. Hey, Kathleen and Deb. Hey, Lori. Welcome along. Susan, you missed yesterday. Oh, you know what? That's a good point. It should say 8 o'clock. I don't know where some of these things came from. Let's see if I can't change that. Thanks for pointing that out. Sometimes, I guess the last time I did this, it was, it must have been at 10 a.m. Last time I did this was like a year ago, this one. Alright, now that should be better. Hey, Carol. Hey, Jacqueline and Joanne. And anybody I missed while I was changing out that graphic. Oh, thanks, Jackie. Evening, Mary. Hey, Amy in Anchorage. Hey, Becky. Oh, thanks, Joanne. I don't know if my back has recovered from the sled ride yet, really. That face down one, that was a lot easier when you're a kid, let me tell you. Evening, Jerry in Arizona. Hey, David. Hey, Amy. Hey, Jacqueline. Hey, Mary in Nashville. Evening, Gregory in Brooklyn. Dirk, I am just having some Buffalo Trace with a little bit of tiny bit of hot water. Ah, Joy, I'm glad to hear that. Hey, Jordana. Hey, Beck. Hey, Mom. Hey, Katie. Now, those old sled with runners don't come cheap. Plus, I think they're even more painful. Rosebud. Hey, Jennifer. Be a good ride. I just realized how long it's been since I did this one, really. I know I did it October of 2020. And I guess a few months after that. Hey, look who's here. In case it might be a shorter post show tonight because I am tired. And here's the real star of the show. For all the newbies out there, this is Miles. He is our mascot. You can see him down in the corner. Hey, Lady Meow Sauce, over on Twitch. Hey, Phoenix. GoPuff gets to my place in like 2 minutes. It's awesome. Their place is like just up the road. So if I get an ice cream craving and don't feel like venturing out. Hey, Heidi and Catlin. Kendra, yeah, you can go to twitch.tv/AdamChicago. This simulcast Facebook Live is still where like 99% of the viewers are. We're getting a few more on YouTube. There's some on Twitch as well. Bag Miles cannot do the airplane rides anymore. He's too big. The bag breaks. Hey, Tombstone. What's up with you, Gary? Now, Kendra, I think I have an account on TikTok, but I haven't tried to do anything with it yet. Oh, Jan, that sounds cool. Alex, I tried that too, but he's just too big for it now. Priya's too skittish for such things, though she does love to play in bags. He does still ride in the boxes occasionally. Right now, there's not a box out here for him. Evening, Debbie and Cindy. Thanks to everybody hopping on. Miles. You gonna say hi to the people again? Miles will not get off of my desk when I'm at the desk these days. He loves getting on the keyboard. Hello, Amy. Evening, Ann. Katie, Priya's around here someplace. Priya's back on the couch. You can see her back there. Priya's not quite as sociable as Miles is. Hey, Lori, over on YouTube. I occasionally let Miles type out a tweet when he gets on the computer. It's just mostly punctuation. Very avant-garde. Most of us can't really understand it. Hey, Maria in NYC. I'll be there in a couple months. Got some school groups coming up. Just sending my sightseeing guide license renewal paperwork. So as not to have to take the Strange and Kafka-esque test again. 140 out of 150, thank you. Hey Lana, hey Paula. Will I do boat tours in real life this summer? I don't know, we'll find out. Boat tours are tougher to do because they cost a lot more money up front. I have to sell a lot of tickets just to break even. So that's tricky. Hey, Grandma Belle. Hey, Aviva. And hey, Gene. Hey, Tom. Evening, Joanne. Definitely time for boat drinks, Robin. I'm just having some Buffalo Trace tonight. Guys gotta do something to stay warm. More likely we do the boat tour in October again. I have an easier time booking them at that time, etc. Hey, Richard. Well, all right, everybody. I'm going to give it just a second or so. We'll let Benny Goodman play just a little bit more before I get started here. So a lot of people kind of come on right at 8 o'clock, so we'll give him a second for that. As long as enough people buy the boat tours, I don't need a GoFundMe. As long as enough people book tickets, it's a risky outlay. Unless I want to work for Shoreline and make $30 a tour, or something like that. Which I've done. I did that a couple of summers. And have ridiculous rules to follow. That I didn't, but still. Sal, that's who I usually work on, is Summer of George. And they pay me a little better when I'm just working for the company that usually rents them. Brad, sometimes, yes, they do. Oh, the sledding was great yesterday. I should get a cut of the bar profits. Well, the bigger boat tour companies will do so much to make sure the tour guides make as little money as humanly possible. I mean, I could average out how much they were grossing on the tour plus how much I was getting paid. It was a sad state of affairs. Like, even the Beatles farthing a single that they each got was a better deal than I was getting for those guys. But alright. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome along once again. I think it is time that we get going properly around here. Make sure I have all of my proper windows up. All right, welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, and I'm on the History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time. So I am, of course, incredibly famous. So, among my books are Ghosts of Chicago, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, the brand new Murder Maps, which came out through Thames and Hudson just a couple of months ago now. And coming this summer will be Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets. Definitely lots of secrets in there. If you like secrets, this is going to be the book for you. But I really do enjoy doing boat tours, and usually about once or twice every October, I'll do one called the Curious Cruise. I started doing it originally with a company called Atlas Obscura, and really it takes an architecture tour, but adds in things like true crime stories and ghost stories and all kinds of stuff like that. So without further ado, this is a longer one tonight. It's more footage than I usually have, and I'm feeling tired already. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Here we are, ladies and gentlemen, just off of Navy Pier. Getting started here in Chicago. Now, right over here, this is known as DuSable Harbor, named after Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable, our first non-native settler here in Chicago. Very little is really known about that guy. He's thought to have been a fur trader from Haiti, though really nobody's entirely sure. But right over here in what is called Ogden Slip, right, this little area around here in the 1860s, just a little bit further down, there was a guy by the name of Colonel Fred Hurlbut. Now, Colonel Fred Hurlbut had served in the Civil War. He got sent home on furlough right before Robert E. Lee surrendered, got here just in time to celebrate with everybody in town, then to get the news that Lincoln had been assassinated. They rounded up every soldier they could get to march in the procession. Lincoln had kind of a cross-country funeral, and every city tried to outdo each other with flashy displays of mourning. It looked about like this going through Chicago. This probably would have been a turn onto Lake Street from Michigan Avenue. And according to the paperwork, at the front of it was Colonel Fred Hurlbut. He was at the front of his dragoon of soldiers. Then the next day it was noted in the papers that Colonel Hurlbut was missing. Shortly thereafter, they found his body right around where we're sailing right now, a little bit further up the river. Now, he had been in there for really quite a long time, too, certainly since before the Lincoln funeral procession. So most likely the paperwork in the newspaper was just going on the list of who was expected without realizing who didn't show up. But according to the official paperwork, this means that there was a ghost in the Abraham Lincoln funeral parade. Now, as we get under the bridge, we're getting into an area. Now, I know this would have been a little bit further down. It's not really clear exactly where they found him. I'm assuming it was a little bit further away just because this wasn't land yet in 1865. A lot of the stuff that you see over here, like back, if we were sitting and looking in this direction, back behind us where Grant Park is, that's a lot of land that they shoveled into the water after the Great Chicago Fire. What we're going through now is an area called Streeterville. 1888, Captain George Wellington Streeter crashed his houseboat onto the shore, started charging people money to dump their garbage around his boat. And eventually he created this 186-acre landfill that we're now sailing past. At least that's the way he told the story anyway. But he decided that not only did he, had he just created this land, he decided that not only did he own it, but it was his own independent country of which he was the emperor. And it took the cops 30 years to get rid of him. It wasn't just legal battles either. There were gunfights and everything. He had a whole army of hobos that he had allowed to emigrate to this new country of his. But finally, he did lose the Battle of Garbage Hill, spent the last years of his life selling coffee at what is now Navy Pier. But right behind these buildings, we now have a life-size statue of Captain George Wellington Streeter. That's how we treat our criminals and pirates here in Chicago. We make statues out of them. We let them put their names on buildings in 2-story letters. So, just to put a few things in perspective, though. 1888, when Captain Streeter crashed ashore, we had something like 1 million people living in the city. 50 years before, we'd had like 3,000. No city ever grew quite as quickly as this one did, and with that much construction, it would seem almost like a natural place to be the birthplace of the skyscraper. Which is what we are, but it's not really that logical if you look at the soil around here. It's very wet, marshy soil. Older buildings were a whole lot heavier, a whole lot thicker. If they got above 8 or 9 floors, they would start to sink into the wet, marshy soil. But then we developed steel frame construction here, thanks to William LeBaron Jenney. The idea is you just build a skeleton for the building out of steel, then everything else, all of the masonry, all of the stone, everything else like that, just gets draped over that skeleton like a curtain. That allowed for much lighter buildings and allowed us to go much, much higher up into the sky like this. And from here we can see just about every major style of building. You've probably already seen a couple of glimpses of things like the Beaux-Arts style, the style that was common in the late 19th century with all the columns and the neoclassical elements. We've seen a little bit of Art Deco, that streamlined style from the 1930s and 20s, the Jazz Age architecture. And then we've got these very plain rectangle buildings that represent modernism, and then postmodernism is everything else. If you see a building and don't know quite how to describe it, you can just say, oh, how postmodern. And you'll probably be right. It's like the Calvin ball of aesthetics. Postmodernism is a style that we make up as we go along. So as we get under here, we're getting into an area that, after Captain Streeter came in, it came to be known, well, before that, it came to be known as the Sands. We're getting about to where the land would have started back in the day. The Sands was an area that was referred to as by the Chicago Tribune as not ornamental to our morals. Eventually, Mayor Long John Wentworth just went through and bought up all of the buildings and tore them down in the middle of the night. Thus, this congregation of the vilest haunts of the most depraved and degraded creatures in our city has been literally wiped out, and the miserable beings who swarmed there driven away. Hereafter, we hope the Sands will be the abode of the honest and industrious, and that efficient measures will be taken to prevent any portions of the city from becoming the abode of another such gathering of vile and vicious persons. Where are my vile and vicious persons at? All right. Got plenty of them around here to this day, I am quite sure. There was all kinds of fun articles about that. If Jolly Green escaped his hackman and got safe in that locality in the elephant hunt, going to see the elephant as they called it. Wild. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about our first bit of architecture here. We're getting right about to the place where the city really started. Our first, one of our early settlers, who often claimed to be the first, was a guy named John Kinsey. Looked about like this. This is some British politician he was always said to look like. Nobody really knows. There's not really a drawing of him. Also committed our first murder. He had a rival fur trader named Jean Lalime. Killed him, moved into his house, buried the body in the front yard, which was the style at the time. And just about 108 years later, in 1920, came the Wrigley Building. This magnificent one by Graham Anderson, Probst & White, named for the builder William Wrigley Jr., the same guy whose name is on Wrigley Field. Now, one of the things that made Mr. Wrigley such a success was his ads for his chewing gum. So when he announced he was going to build this first skyscraper that would be on Michigan Avenue, everybody assumed he was going to have a giant Wrigley billboard. And he said, no, I just want the most elegant building in the world, no advertisements, just a small plaque that says Wrigley Building. And we loved him for it, because after all, if you put your name in 2-story letters on the tallest building in the vicinity, like some hoodlum, people were just starting to become aware of the works of Sigmund Freud at the time. So, and that worked. People kept on building in that old Beaux-Arts style just so they would continue to fit in with the Wrigley Building, even after Beaux-Arts started to go out of fashion and Art Deco took over. Now, that's the kind of thing that architects do have to think about, is how is my building going to fit in with other ones? Like when 420 North Wabash was being built here. I can never remember the exact number. The board of directors likes you to use the address. But Adrian Smith, the architect, had to figure, how do I make this fit in with everything else? So you see these setbacks here. That first setback on the right is set at the same height as the setbacks on the Wrigley building. Next setback on the above is set at the same height as this black building that's coming up next, currently being covered up. And then the other one on the left is set at this height of these corncob buildings that are coming up just beyond that. Now the next one coming up is a perfect example of modernism, very plain black rectangle, designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who you might remember from the Graceland Cemetery tours. His gravestone is a plain black rectangle, just like most of his buildings. This was the style known as modernism. He described it as being like a new kind of cathedral for a new kind of religion, that religion being commerce. This is one of his last buildings, the old IBM building, currently the American Medical Association building. Now, one of his students was a guy by the name of Bertrand Goldberg, who believed in a lot of the tenets of modernism, but didn't like all the rectangles, as you can see here in Marina City, which he designed in the early 1960s. There's been a lot of talk of these places being haunted lately. A lot of people report like poltergeist activity, lights going off and on, just getting a weird feeling in the laundry room. Now, they found a couple of construction deaths that happened when it was being designed, but also before it was even finished, one of our most notable but more forgotten gangsters died there. A guy named Murray the Camel Humphreys. This guy had been around since the Capone days, but he was off and on a double agent. The FBI loved this guy. He would be wearing a wire and have meetings, say, all right, this meeting of the Chicago underworld will now come to order. Everybody had a good laugh. Then one day, he didn't quite rat on enough people, because one day they knocked on his door in here and said, okay, it's time, we're arresting you, we got to take you downtown. So they took him downtown, he was booked, paid bail, got back to his apartment, dropped dead of a heart attack that very night. At least that's the official cause of death. But Marina City, Bertrand Goldberg, early 60s, thought to be about the most modern buildings in the world at the time when they were built, and they still look very modern to me now. They're not quite as modern in their functionality. These concrete buildings are where cell phone signal goes to die. But the use of all of the cement ties them into the brutalist movement that was popular at the time in the 1960s. These hulking slabs of concrete buildings. This is a very elegant example. 55 Wacker, the hashtag building or the pound sign building, depending on how old you are. Designed by Otto Stark, who happens to be my next door neighbor. We only see him like rare glimpses in the middle of the night. It's almost like a ghost sighting when you actually see Mr. Stark walking around. And of course, I'm always like, hi, Mr. Stark, just so I can pretend I'm Spider-Man. Clark Street Bridge was the site of one of our first riots, the Lager Beer Riot of the 1850s, when Mayor Levy Boone, a member of the Know Nothing Party, tried to shut down all of the beer halls on Sundays. We had a pretty good riot. There's a rumor that they swung the bridge around so all the protesters got stuck on the bridge. It doesn't seem to be true. And right over here, this is the Reed Murdoch building from 1913, fairly famously known now as being the site in the Chicago River where the Eastland capsized. You can see here, this is a ship lying on its side. The Eastland was an excursion boat that was booked to go to Michigan City, Indiana on a company picnic for the Western Electric Company. But they overloaded the ship. They had raised the capacity more than they really should have. The entire thing tipped over and ended up lying on its side right here in the river. Right about exactly where we are now. There wasn't a LaSalle Street Bridge at the time. It's difficult nowadays to know exactly how many people died in something like this. The agreed upon figure here is 844 people were killed. 22 entire families were wiped off the map, and the boat had not even been untied from the dock yet. Now, the Reed Murdoch building, where we just passed, was where most of the bodies were taken, at least initially. They kind of pressed that into service as a makeshift morgue. They brought in every undertaker they could to embalm all the bodies, then they were mostly moved about a mile west of here over to the 2nd Regiment Armory building. That's where they were lined up to be identified. Some other morgues were used as well. And all of them are now said to be haunted, of course, including the old 2nd Regiment Armory was Harpo Studios for years. They tore that down a couple of years ago, put up the new McDonald's there. I really want to find out that one's haunted now. The Merchandise Mart, 1930, Graham Anderson Probst in white, but built over one of our least known cemeteries. In the 1830s, when people first started living in Chicago in great numbers and people first decided we needed a proper cemetery, they built a few. There was one about where the water tower is now. There was one up about, down about where Chinatown is now, and one that's very little remembered and very little documented right where the Merchandise Mart is today. Now, this place has been bombed twice. People have asked me a lot if I could find out if there was a ghost there. I guess the security guards get pretty spooked. They didn't have any really specific stories for me. But it was bombed once in construction and once in the 70s. The articles about it in the 70s are hilarious. The security guard said, I heard this bang and I just took off running. And wow, some security guard. Getting up to an area called Wolf Point now. This is called Wolf Point East, one of our new towers. They're building Wolf Point North right here, Wolf Point West off to the side. Wolf Point South, sorry. I love that they're calling these the Wolf Point buildings. Wolf Point is what the early pioneers and settlers called this little point of land where the two branches of the river come together. Exactly why is kind of lost to history, but probably just because there were so many wolves in the environment back then. In fact, they used to have a holiday once every day in the winter in the 1840s. They would shut down all the businesses so everybody could help chase wolves out of the woods and out into the ice on the lake. I think they only ever got one. But it was a holiday not unlike Whacking Day or Weasel Stomping Day, which are still celebrated in a couple of small towns, according to cartoons. But this was downtown Chicago to the early pioneers and settlers in the 1830s, 1840s. Probably the best known place around here at the time was the Sauganash Hotel, where the proprietor Mark Bobine used to say, I keep the tavern like hell and I play the fiddle like the devil. Now, he used to charge $1 for blankets, and if you fell asleep, they would rent the blanket to somebody else. Probably just because, think how hard it must have been to get clean laundry at the time. Straight ahead of us, for the other thing we don't really think of, think how hard it was to keep things cool before advanced refrigeration. When this place was built, this one that we're pointing directly at right now is the old North American Cold Storage Warehouse, 1907. Oldest building we see on the tour, I think. Now, when it was built to keep things cool in there as a cold storage warehouse, the walls were about 3 feet thick. They were stuffed with frozen horsehair and pipes full of ammonia and brine that were pumped through it as a coolant. Now, in the 1970s, when the architect Harry Weiss decided he wanted to turn it into a condo building, condos and lofts, he had to air the place out for a long time. Had to haul away like 500 train car loads worth of frozen horsehair. It would have been a whole lot easier just to tear the thing down and put up a new one. But Harry Weiss was a very preservation-minded architect. They used to say never stand next to Harry Weiss for 5 entire minutes. Otherwise, he might have you declared a public landmark. Then you'll have to go get a public hearing every time you want to get your hair cut. Now, as we approach the bridge here, the scariest part of the evening perhaps, I like everybody to duck, not only because it's a low bridge, especially when we're working on the Summer of George, but this is also the bridge where in 2004, the Dave Matthews Band parked their tour bus and the driver decided to let off an awful lot of sewage from the bus onto the boat that was passing by below. I was not there that dreadful day, but we remember. We remember. And if I ever lose my head on one of these bridges, I know it's going to be here, and I will haunt the place forever as the headless tour guide of the Dave Matthews Band Poop Bridge. All right, we're going to spin the boat around right here. Now, I don't want to alarm anybody, but we may be going into the devil's territory here. Way back in the early 1850s, there was a kid named Knut Iverson who drowned in the river a little bit further up. The story went around that a bunch of other kids had said, hey, we're all going to go steal apples from Old Man Elston's orchard. If you don't steal any, we'll drown you. And he elected to be drowned rather than steal an apple. And after this, there were lots of Sunday school sermons telling kids, now, if anybody ever tempts you to steal, be like Knut and die instead. I always tell my own kid, steal the damn apple. You can go pay the farmer back later. It's not worth getting killed over, geez. But later it was determined that none of these boys were ever identified. It was probably just a story somebody made up. He'd probably just died horsing around in the river. But by then they'd already raised a lot of money to build a monument to Knut. Nobody ever really explained what happened to all of that money. But there are people who say that the fact that they never identified the other boys just proves that it was really the devil and his imps, having nothing better to do than tempt boys to steal apples. So the River Cottages by Harry Weiss, same guy who did the cold storage building, designed to look like the schooners that used to sail up to Wolf Point back in the old days. Ties in visually. This is also right about where the river first flooded back in the 1990s. Just behind us, some diggers were putting in some new pilings and accidentally flooded the old freight tunnels that are 40 feet down below here. We're also right on the path where the Medusa Challenger used to go. That was a barge that is still going around the Great Lakes. It's just used as a tug now or something, not as a regular one, now known as the St. Mary's Challenger. But as the Medusa Challenger was the largest ship that would come down here, used to break the bridges all the time and occasionally dredge up dead bodies. Or so the legend goes, anyway. Now, coming up right ahead of us over here, first we've got the River Point building. With these things underneath it, these little circles are actually vents for pumping out diesel exhaust fumes from the railroad tracks that are hidden behind the wall. It's what they call an air rights building. The train companies sold the rights to the air up above it. Now, you almost can't tell on a black and white one, but coming up, there's this one that looks like it's got a wedge chopped out of it, 150 North Riverside by Getch Partners. Remarkable feat of engineering. But it is also going right along on Lake Street. It was really right up here on Lake Street, just out of the frame, where in 1934 a young woman named Mary Bregovy was killed in a car crash. A couple of her friends had gone out to Goldblatt's department store on the south side, met a couple of guys. Her friends thought they were too sleazy, but Mary Bregovy decided to go out dancing with these guys. And we all know what happens when you drink and drive. You die. They wound up crashing into one of the yellow L-track support beams for this stretch of tracks. The two guys were all right, but Mary Bregovy was thrown through the windshield of the car and killed. A couple of days later, she was buried at Resurrection Cemetery on the south side, became probably the leading candidate for the true identity of the ghost that we call Resurrection Mary, probably the most famous ghost in Chicagoland. Now, Resurrection Mary is one of those ghosts where people will be driving their car along and see a girl by the side of the road crying, so they'll offer her a ride. Usually she doesn't really say much until they get up to Resurrection Cemetery, and then she'll start saying, "Pull over, you have to pull over right now." They'll say, "Well, I can't pull over here, this is the cemetery." She'll say, "No, you have to pull over now." So they'll pull over and say, "Well, but all right, can I walk you the rest of the way home?" And she'll just run out of the door, walk up to the gates, and disappear. Vanishing hitchhikers like this are fairly common in folklore. They've been identified back to biblical times. But in Chicago, ours has a lot more first-hand accounts than most of them. We're not really sure it's Mary Bregovy specifically. In fact, I've analyzed every first-hand account of this. She died. I think that a few of them, the story was probably about 3 years old by the time that she died. We like her as a candidate because she was at a dance hall. She was killed in a car wreck. That ties her in a little bit to the urban legend of the vanishing hitchhiker. Better than some other candidates, but there are at least 70 young Marys buried at Resurrection in the right time period, including 5 Marys who died in the Eastland disaster. And even then, we're just making the very broad assumption that it's actually a ghost of a girl named Mary at all. As I've said, I've analyzed every account. She never says what her name is. So we might have just been calling her Resurrection Mary all this time because it's got a better ring to it than, like, Resurrection Ethel, Resurrection Beulah. This is the Boeing building, originally the Morton Salt building. Another air rights building. They got trains going around underneath there. Washington Boulevard, of course, named for Frederick Boom Boom Washington of the Sweat Hogs. Hi there. Coming up, some Art Deco by Hullabird and Root, the Chicago Daily News building from the late 1920s. Now, this was one of the first skyscrapers to have a public veranda out front, which is kind of an odd idea at the time. This was a much rougher area back then. There's a terrific novel from the 40s called Knock on Any Door by Willard Motley. It's the origin of the phrase, live fast, die young, and have a good-looking corpse. About every other page in that book, somebody is getting mugged in the plaza outside of the Daily News building. Daily News has finally been digitized. You can get it on Genealogy Bank now. There's still plenty of newspapers in Chicago that have them. The Chicago Post, the Chicago Press, the Chicago Journal, the Chicago Times, the Chicago Herald. A couple of years of some of these are up now. There's still a lot more to go. Chicago American, first and foremost. I really wish they would digitize that one. But I also love the microfilm room, so what am I saying? On the right, some more modernism by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. This is Gateway 1 and Gateway 2. Not by Mies van der Rohe, but Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill were so enamored of Mies van der Rohe and followed his rules and philosophy so thoroughly in those days that Frank Lloyd Wright used to call those guys the three blind mice. But on a good modernist building, you can never see the seams, you can never see the screws, they're endlessly elegant, they're still modern even now, 60 years after they were built. Which is not something you can necessarily say about all of the postmodern buildings or the brutalist buildings that came next. Some of those have aged very badly. Get ourselves under the bridge here. Now, right over to the left was there was a robbery back in early 1880s. If there are trolls out there tonight, I will get them. I don't see any trolls myself. I don't really see much of the comments much, unless there's that many emojis, Gary. Just over here, a guy named James Tracy was captured in the midst of a robbery. He'd already killed a couple of people. So he was sentenced to be hanged. And after hanging, they realized at the time they weren't really doing a very good job of hanging people here in Chicago. So they decided, well, let's see what happens. They took his body across the street to a doctor's office and started pumping him full of electricity. And this is a doctor like 30 years after the fact reminiscing about it. It was reported on widely at the time. The whole doctor's report was published. Bottom line is, no, they could not bring him back to life, but they did get the color back in his cheeks, got his heart beating again, and got him to start twitching. Probably just because they were pumping him full of electricity. When they built this little place in front of us in the 70s, the Tribune described it as like a small black box heavily strapped with steel cables, as though it were holding in something volatile, something that had to be contained or else it would explode. Which is a pretty good description of what used to go on inside of the place. It was the old commodities trading pit where guys would yell and scream about oat, corn, and barley deals. Up on the left, this is one that I used to point out just as a really good example of bad modernism. This is one where you can see all of the seams, you can see all of the cracks, but they finally got decided that they were tired of being referred to as that conspicuously dull building. Originally, they just had this beige cement slab over the elevator shaft, so they added this design, which is a map of the Chicago River. That dot in the middle is the "You Are Here" portion. So we can kind of plot out the whole rest of the route by looking at this building. And by doing that, they made the building way more interesting just about overnight. So cheers to them for that. I'd so much rather talk about that than a building that I don't like anyway. Now, I almost believed for a while this next building coming up on the other side of the bridge was cursed. This was the old post office. Now, it was built back in the 1930s as a real top-of-the-line post office. Trains could pick up the mail underneath the building. That blew people away. They experimented with having auto-gyros land on the roof so they could take mail to the airport by air. Just blew people away at the time. It was the largest post office anywhere. But by the 1960s, it had outlived its usefulness. Technology had caught up with it, and people were starting to say it was time to get rid of it. They finally built a more modern one in the 1990s, and this one fell into complete disuse for about 20 years. It just sat there occasionally functioning as a film set. It's both the bank and the police station in The Dark Knight. But there were fires, there were deals that fell through, there were times when they sold it to guys who turned out to be con artists. One thing and another, I really thought that it might be cursed for a while. But now it's finally gotten on its feet. They've redone it as an office building now, which was kind of a surprise. I really thought they were going to go with something a little bit wilder than an office. Because residential has been such the thing in the last few years. Well, if there are trolls, if it's Hawk and Pullman, those guys can hang out here all night if they want. They're all right. Well, one of them's a murderer and the other was a terrible boss, but hey, they're all right. Getting into this section now, this was where a lot of the ghost activity among the pioneers was concentrated. They talked a lot about ghosts that they would see out in the prairie here. One was a woman who walked around as though she was looking for something. Some believed that it was a woman who had lost her baby and was still trying to find her. But as one pioneer said, I guess she must have found it because eventually she stopped showing up. There was also one of the weirder ones. They talked about seeing a phosphorescent ghostly mule running around what was then the prairies down around this section of the city. It was said to be able to shift shapes and everything, which really sounds a lot like something that might have come up in an old Native American legend. I don't know if anybody's tied it to anything specific, but that's what it sounds like to me anyway. Right ahead of us, if you remember Marina City, the Bertrand Goldberg building, you might recognize some of his architectural style up here in this Logan's Run looking building, River City, which originally he planned to be much, much bigger than this. He planned to have this go all the way up to back to the last bridge and be about 70 stories high. It would have fit like 200,000 people. It's like the whole population of Des Moines, Iowa, all in one building. But it took him a long time to get the permits for that. It ended up not being built until he had scaled it back after like 20 years of dealing. So it's a 1980s building, very late for brutalism. But it's still very much like Marina City. It was designed to be like a city within a city. There's everything you need there. There's a grocery store, which is about 50% booze. There's a preschool right across from the grocery store that's about 50% booze. There's a doctor's office in there. And one thing I'm asked a lot on these tours is which of these buildings was Al Capone in? And the short answer for the longest time is like, there's a lot of urban legends, but really the answer is probably none of them. However, if you take a look down the street here, I'm going to turn the camera to the side right before we get to River City. Cigarettes illegal in this state. Just look down there for a split second. You'll see this clock tower right there. Blink and you miss it, but it's there. It's the Dearborn Station. Al Capone changed trains on his way to prison in that location. And if we look just over to the right a little bit, a couple of blocks over, we would come to the site where Mrs. O'Leary's cottage and barn were. That was, of course, where the Great Chicago Fire started. We stopped blaming it on her a long time ago, though. Let's go ahead and spin this boat around. River City will be coming right back up again in the opposite direction. So, all right, I'm going to take you back then to 1871, October 6th. A guy by the name of Barton Edsall was found lying dead in the entryway of his North Side mansion. For about 2 days, it was all anybody could talk about. How did Barton Edsall really die? Was it a murder? Was it a suicide? Did he accidentally shoot himself in the head? There was evidence for all three of these scenarios, but nothing really concrete. Finally, on the third day, he was buried at Graceland Cemetery in his business partner's family plot. Newspapers went to press that morning saying, "We are still going to get to the bottom of this." That night, though, was the Great Chicago Fire. The Great Chicago Fire, everybody forgot about Barton Edsall completely. He was in the same family plot now as Colonel Frederick Hurlbutz. Hurlbut was a cousin of his business partner. We'll pull up a little bit more here now. I'm going to move us a little bit faster through here. This is one of the longer tours. We're going to skip a little bit past. Off in the distance there, you can see the Board of Trade standing up with the statue on top. I'll give you a better look at it here. So one thing about the virtual versions, I can show you better looks. This is the Board of Trade by Hullabird and Root, one of my very favorite buildings in all of Chicago. 1930 with the statue of Ceres, the Roman goddess of grains and agriculture, up there on the top. Now, if you look really closely, Ceres does not have a face. People like to say that's because John Story, the sculptor, thought nobody's ever going to build a building this tall again. And there were already many, many much taller buildings than this in New York. But he did say something to the effect of, as high up as it's going to be, nobody's going to be able to see the face that well anyway. Which was a fair point. Now, underneath that statue, it was the tallest building in Chicago for a good 25 years. Just barely, but it kept the record. Straight in front of us here, this one with all of the balconies. This is 225 West Van Buren, by architect Ralph Johnson. Some kids like to call it the Minecraft building. Adults call it the Morse code building because the dots and dashes of the balconies really do kind of look like a Morse code symbol. You can translate it into Morse code. It says MTRDEE, which means nothing. It's just what they call it. MTRDEE. It's this code for Mr. Trump. Really does embarrass everyone. And just to the left of that one, though, this one that is standing upright here, the little circular thing on top, is another one with a lot of urban legends about it. It's called 311 South Wacker. And when 311 South Wacker was built, it was the tallest building in the world that didn't have a name. There's a lot of urban legends going around saying it was supposed to look like somebody's engagement ring who had died or something like that. These things have no basis in fact. Really, this is a 1990s postmodern building. Their idea was to do a modern version of the Chicago Tribune building, which we'll be seeing later on. That's something a lot that the postmodernists really like to do is take a building and make it new for the 90s. Now, it was the tallest building in the world that didn't have a name at the time that it was built. But New York finally had to go and beat that a few years later. In fact, New York now has several buildings that are taller than this and don't have a name. And that one gets my goat. I want that one back. But of course, directly behind it, rising 1,451 feet tall, rising above all the other buildings as sure as Kilimanjaro rises like Olympus above the Serengeti, the Sears Tower stands 1,451 feet tall. The official name is now the Willis Tower, but locals still refer to it as the Sears under penalty of torture. On a clear day from the observation deck, you can see 4 states. Today's selections are Wisconsin, Indiana, Nebraska, and New Jersey. Okay, Gopal, stop bothering people. Okay, if I see that comment again, I'm going to kick you. This just kind of sounds like a scam. All right. 1,451 feet tall, designed by Fazlur Khan, the engineer, Bruce Graham, the architect. I just noticed at the last second in the Graceland Cemetery book I had called him Bruce Campbell. Thank goodness I caught that in time. I would never, ever have lived that one down. Fazlur Khan developed what is called bundled tube construction. It's supposed to look like a pack of cigarettes all coming out at a different heights, which isn't just an aesthetic thing. Okay, I think I got the troll out of the way. I pushed the button anyway. 1,451 feet tall. It was the tallest building in the world for quite a number of years. 25 years, which is a really long time for a building to hold that record, honestly. And that 1,451 feet does not include the antennas. It's a weird little quirk in the rules of architecture that spires count towards the overall height, but antennas do not. As we get a little bit past the map building, we'll get another look at it. Sorry, I think I think I should have gotten the spammer out of here. Sorry about that. Sorry about the trouble there, guys. I don't always see what's going on in the comments. Lori, it was called the Sears Tower because Sears built it originally. And here we'll get a slightly better view of it. Of course, it is now not the tallest building in the world anymore. That honor currently goes to the Burj Dubai in Dubai. It's already about to lose its record to the Jeddah Tower, which has been under construction forever, but should they ever finish it, it'll be something like 3,000 feet tall. And Burj Khalifa is only like it was about 2,700 feet. And now, for a long time, it was still the highest occupied floor in the world. All the taller ones just had a lot of vanity height, like spires. But it's finally been beaten for, even in the United States, it's not the highest occupied floor in the world. New York finally beat that with Central Park Tower. However, Central Park Tower, the Burj Khalifa, and Jeddah Tower, all designed by Chicago architect Adrian Smith, so we still win, and Adams Street here was named after me. It's missing an apostrophe, I know. I know. Coming up right ahead of us here, you can see this one with the kind of the shell out of it. This is the old Hartford Insurance building. Hartford Insurance, it wouldn't have been the exact same building, but Hartford Insurance is one of several insurance companies that was targeted by H.H. Holmes, the Devil in the White City guy. One of about half a dozen in the city that I know of, but he's the only one, they're about the only ones that he talked about specifically when he was writing stuff down later. He famously built a building down on 63rd Street that we now know as the Murder Castle, that at least by reputation was a hotel where he was preying on victims, people who came to the World's Fair, and he had any number of ways to murder them inside of the building. It's a little more fiction than fact, but we do know when he added the 3rd floor onto that building, he took out 5 or 6 insurance policies on it, including one at Hartford Insurance. Then, strangely enough, a couple of months later, it caught fire. Though to their credit, the insurance companies were not fooled for 1 second. Now up here, this is the old Commodities Exchange building. It was really built with executives in mind. You know, every executive wants a corner office. Normally you get 4 corner offices per floor. Here, but all these extra corners, you get something like 32 corner offices in every floor. Which is great, because that way everybody gets a corner office, everybody gets to be a winner, nobody has to feel left out. Sounds like a great joke for millennials, but it was built for baby boomers. And I'm a couple years older than the millennials myself, but I've tried. I'm helping to kill the home buying thing, you know, the home ownership thing. Coming up on our right by Graham Anderson Probst and White, 1929, the Civic Opera Building. Civic Opera Building was the site of a couple of deaths when it was first being built, including a stuntman. There was a stuntman whose big thing was climbing up to the top of the building as a human fly. A guy's done to the Sears Tower a couple of times. But a guy got all the way to the top, and in this case, fell, and also hit somebody and killed them too. You might say the place was cursed. They opened it right after the stock market crash in 1929, which is not great for the opera. Samuel Insull, the owner, was living up in the penthouse up top. He lost all of his money and all the money of 30,000 other people, so he had to flee to Greece, as one does. He is notably absent from his own family plot at Graceland Cemetery because he died over there and they never sent the body all the way back. I don't think anybody in his family could really stand him, honestly. There's an outstanding legend that he built the place for his wife, a would-be opera singer. He and his wife were not really on that much of speaking terms by then. There was another guy. It was actually Harold Fowler McCormick blew an awful lot of his money. He never built an opera house himself, but he did blow a lot of money and left his wife for an opera singer of questionable talents. All right, Ralph Bakshi's modern 1980s, new for the 80s postmodern take on the Civic Opera Building right there at 123 Whacker. Raised a lot of eyebrows by designing that one using a computer. Now, underneath one of these bridges, it's not really clear which one because every time this guy told the story, he named a different bridge. But in 1915, a diver named Frenchy Deneau was digging a trench in the riverbed to lay some cables down. While he's digging, his shovel brushed against some kind of big metal thing, and it turned out that what he had found was the wreck of a 40-foot-long homemade submarine. That submarine was raised up a couple of months later. And Toxic Talks 102, I'm in Rogers Park. So they never figured out who built this submarine or anything. They claimed that they found a dead guy and a dead dog on board the thing. I think they probably faked that part of it, honestly. Because they put it on display the next month under the name The Fool Killer. For a dime, you could see the submarine and the dead guy they had found on board the thing. My favorite is down at the bottom there, Special for Children. Groups of 10 or more children were half off on Saturday mornings. As you know, if you come along on our time travel pub crawls, that's what we go around on is the Fool Killer. It disappears from the record in 1916, last seen at the Riverview Amusement Park. Up here, the Curving Building, 333 Whacker, the Nuveen Building, tends to win a lot of popularity contests. So it's a very simple building, but it's also a very elegant building. It's a very eye-catching building. And some of this is just because they really fiendishly engineered it to blend in with the environment. The curves go right around with the curve of the river. The octagon-shaped support columns match the octagons over here at the Merchandise Mart, as we discussed earlier on. And of the two colors of glass there, at least one of them usually matches the color of the water. That's a little useless to talk about on days when we're doing this in black and white. You can see where I had to stop the camera there for a second and restart. It's been a while since I filmed these things. There's some of the other buildings, like a Wolf Point South over on the other side of us, is all grown up now. We'll make a quick duck underneath the bridge here. Turn over to the right for Halliburton Roots' old Chicago Times building. Chicago Times, this one with the columns here. Eventually the Sun-Times building, still the best building they ever had. A lot of famous criminals came in and out of this place. Yellow Kid Vile walked into the lobby and gave an interview to a reporter in the 1950s, one of the greatest con artists. When The Sting came out, anybody who had read Yellow Kid's autobiography recognized that they had borrowed just about every con in that movie from his book. His ghostwriter wanted to sue. We're going around Wacker Drive now. Below that is Lower Wacker Drive. Below that is Lower Wacker Drive, where Octavio had to drive me a couple of weeks ago when they towed my car there. If you have to go to Lower, you are having a bad day. Or you're going drag racing. But now they put in some speed bumps down there, so it's kind of useless for drag racing anymore. But talking about Lower, maybe the scariest thing on this tour. Now, right over here, we got the Builders Building by Burnham and Burnham, the sons of Daniel Burnham, the architect, but using some of his recognizable style with the columns up there. Daniel Burnham loved columns. This is these colonnades of columns. If you look up at the top of buildings all over the city, you notice these rows, these colonnades of columns. You don't notice it if you're not looking for them, but they're there. Including at the Marshall Fields over on State, which is now the Macy's, which is one of the places where we can actually trace Al Capone. It came out during his trial that he used to buy all of his custom-made underwear there. He favored custom-tailored union suits made out of ladies' glove silk, which the jury thought was just hilarious. They cost him like $20 a pair in 1920s money. That's really fancy underwear. I can't trace him to this one, the LaSalle Wacker Building, Halliburton Route 1930, but I can trace his gang here. Early 1930s, they were operating out of a room on the 8th floor led by Frank the Enforcer Nitti, who took over after Capone went to jail. Nitti was not quite as good at Capone as evading the cops or as good at public relations. Cops broke in there one day and shot Frank the Enforcer Nitti up pretty good. In fact, when Mayor Cermak was killed by a guy a couple of months later, officially the guy was aiming for FDR and ended up hitting Cermak. Other people said it was really mob retribution for the shooting of Frank the Enforcer Nitti. Of course, that's just the kind of thing some people would say. Right here, 77 Wacker, the United Building. Postmodern take on the colonnades of columns, even a Greek-style pediment roof up there. Blends in with the sky, so on a clear day it looks like you can see right through it, like you're seeing the Parthenon up on the hill. Four of the columns extend all the way down, tying the whole building together. Endlessly classical and endlessly modern at the same time by Ricardo Bofill, the architect. I don't think that one's ever going to quite go out of style. Straight ahead, you can see Harry Weiss's 17th Church of Christ Scientist, behind which is this mural that always looks like paint samples to me. It's supposed to be a pixelated version of the river. And coming up, you can also see, off in the distance, you can see this one with the shiny top. Urban legends say that it was designed to look like a champagne bottle, which is closer to true than I thought it was. Daniel Burnham Jr. did write that the builders wanted it to look like the color of an old champagne bottle. You hear stories like that all the time and they turn out to be myths, so I was really thrilled when somebody sent me the actual diary that showed that. It's like, hot dang, I never would have guessed. It would have been kind of subversive in 1930 to build a building like that, too. Champagne was illegal. Prohibition was still going on. Not that that stopped anybody in Chicago, but it's very difficult to tell exactly how many speakeasies you really had. These places were not really known for keeping good paperwork, so we end up with a lot of urban legends. Perhaps the most famous of which is people like to say that here at the Jewelers Building with the dome on top, about 70% of the boat tours go by claim that there was a club called the Stratosphere that Al Capone either owned or patronized up in the Dome. And the Stratosphere Club was a real place, but it didn't open until years after Capone went to jail. And didn't last very long either. You had to take like 3 elevators to get up to it, then it cost a lot once you were there. Coming up ahead of us, though, is the Michigan Avenue Bridge. Now, the Michigan Avenue Bridge, the Jewelers Building may have been built with gangsters in mind. There was an elevator for cars in there, the tallest car elevator in the world at the time, so jewelers wouldn't have to get out into the streets of 1920 Chicago with all of their jewels. Which made sense. I mean, right up there, the Michigan Avenue Bridge, Vinny the Schemer Drucci, one of the North Side mobsters, and one of our most colorful gangsters. They called him Vinny the Schemer because he was always coming up with plans like, let's run one of our guys for mayor. They probably would have won, too. But one day he took the cops on one of our greatest car chases. Most of these bridges are drawbridges. They're officially bascule bridges. They open in the middle. And one day, right as the Michigan Avenue Bridge was raising up, Vinny the Schemer Drucci made his drive right for it, right as it was raising up, and jumped the gap in his car. The cops were right behind him, and they made the jump too, but then both parties got caught in traffic right on the other side. Here we have at the Chicago Tribune Tower, the 1920s version of 311 South Wacker. Before I get into that one, though, next to it you can see the Onion Dome on the Intercontinental. Now, the Intercontinental building insists that that place was built originally to be a landing pad for Zeppelins. Blimps. Which is a great story, probably not exactly true. It never would have worked in any case. It's one of several buildings that are said to have Zeppelin landing pads built in. Now, most of which came after the Wingfoot crash in 1919. But here, looking like a Disney villain castle, one of the last of the great Gothic skyscrapers, the Chicago Tribune building, currently being turned into condos. I've got some relics from inside of it sitting around me right now. As a friend who worked there got us into, go around breaking stuff and smoking cigars and drinking scotch. It's a very good night. Another Adrian Smith building, the NBC Tower here with the spire. I love this one. It's very Art Deco. We're not supposed to call it Art Deco because it's from the 1980s. It's Eco Deco. But really, it's more Art Deco than Art Deco with its clean lines, streamlined verticality, simple geometric art. Now, we're getting into a place here where I could probably talk about Chicago's wildest thing. We used to have our drinking water comes out of the lake. The Chicago River was absolutely disgusting for years. I mean, this is where we pour all of our sewage, all of our garbage that would flow out into the lake, and we would drink it right back up. They gradually figured out that this is probably why we were having so many cholera epidemics. We had horrible cholera epidemics that killed a full percentage or two of the population in 1849, 1854, 1866. So, in efforts of that, in 1864, they decided, well, the water's a lot clearer if we would get it a mile out. So maybe if we dig a tunnel a mile out under the water and got all of our water from a mile out, it would be safer. That's why we have a water tower on Michigan Avenue. It's the old pumping station to pump water from a crib a mile out. But while they were digging out that lake tunnel, which looked like this, way down underneath the lake, there was a murder inside of the tunnel. A couple of guys got into a fight, and another one took a file. One of the guys took a file and jammed it into the other guy's neck, killing him instantly. So, for a generation or so, our drinking water was quite literally flowing right through a murder site here in Chicago. Take a quick minute to show off Wanda Vista Tower, also known as the St. Regis Hotel, the second St. Regis Hotel we've had in Chicago. Mob used to shove showgirls out of the windows of the other one, but it was only about a 3-story drop. This would be at 1,200 or so feet by Jeannie Gang Architect, a little bit higher. Such a magnificent building. Black and white just doesn't do this one justice. And of course, straight out of the water, we're also now retracing the steps. We talked earlier about the Fool Killer submarine. This was also a thing called the Fool Killer 3. This was the thing designed by a guy named Captain William Nissen. He had already built the Fool Killer 1 and the Fool Killer 2, which were miniature crafts that he used to do daredevil stunts at Niagara Falls. Then he built the Fool Killer 3, which, as you see here, was essentially a big ball with an axle and a cot for steering. His plan was this would roll over land and sea and make it all the way to the North Pole, which nobody at the time had ever been to, that anyone knew about. So the Fool Killer 3 absolutely cracked people up. He demonstrated it in a park and everybody laughed. So he said, I'll show you that it works. I'll roll it across Lake Michigan. So in 1904, Captain Nissen set out in this giant canvas balloon to go across Lake Michigan. And he actually made it all the way across. He made it to Michigan City, Indiana, but he was dead inside of it when they found it. Or in other reports, washed up onto the shore. But also, just in front of us, the world's largest fidget spinner, and the empty space where they were planning to build the Chicago Spire, which was going to be 2,000 feet tall and shaped like a giant vibrator. It's close to 9 o'clock, I figure I can probably say that now. But alright everybody, this brings us right back to where we started. So I'm going to go ahead and start plugging the upcoming stuff. Sunday morning, we're going to be talking about treason, the Chicago insurrection plot of 1864, when a band of Confederates plotted to burn down the city, take over the election, steal all of the ballot boxes, and throw the Chicago and the nation into chaos, including one of our former mayors back in 1864. Then Thursday night at 7 p.m., slightly different time, though I think we're still going to be able to broadcast it on the usual channel here, at least on the Facebook, Lillian Colley and the Wind Blew Blue Inn, we are going to do a brand new presentation all about my favorite flapper, Lillian Colley, who famously told a judge, "Your Honor, I solemnly swear there is no snuggle pupping at the Wind Blue Inn." And of course, over on the Facebook, we do morning mini tours every day at 10. When I'm working from home, we can put them on YouTube and Twitch as well. Like yesterday, we went virtual sledding. And Friday nights on the Patty Vasquez Show Facebook page, we do a show called Whiskey and a Cookie, where we drink whiskey, eat cookies, and discuss the events of the week. And with that, everybody, quick reminder that if you need a Mysterious Chicago t-shirt, sweatshirt, or hoodie like Luca here, including the brand new one of serial killer Johann Hawk saying, "There's only one way to Hawk," or the naughtier version is available too. That's all at cafepress.com/mysteriouschicago. So, all right, everybody, with that, I'll put the Benny Goodman on. I'm awfully tired tonight, so it might be a short post show, but we'll put the Benny Goodman back on. Just hang out like we always do. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Joanne. Thanks, Audria. Lori, it never got built because it was 2008 happened. They ran out of money. Heather, I shudder to think what kind of research anybody would have done to make them think peppermint lozenges were going to cure cholera. At least it might cover up some of the stink. I believe it is a very smelly way to die. There's a lot of diarrhea involved. Thanks, Deanna. We're on the highway to Hawk. I can see that. I gotta make Johann Hawk more famous is the problem. Or somebody does. Somebody's gotta do a wildly inaccurate but highly entertaining book about Johann Hawk. Then there'll be a market for me to do a more accurate one. Eric, yes, I assure you. I cycled through a lot of puns. Those of you new here, I know we got some new people. There's a Facebook group called Mysterious Chicago Regulars and the Miles Fan Club. Miles is my cat, who many of you met earlier. I don't know where he's gone now. But over there, people just hang out, come up with drinking games for these tours. Share pictures of their cats, just hang out. Trolls don't last long there. Broadway play about Hawk, I could see that. Well, I want to do it like, the way to do it is have him, like, he and Belle Gunnis answering each other's marriage record ads. Do I do a tour of the northwest suburbs? I don't know. I end up in them now and then. Jeff, no, I don't know the person who ran that tour. And Betsy, I might just have to do a book about Hawk on my own. Find some university press that'll put it out. But right now, I got a Thames and Hudson who did Murder Maps. Murder Maps has an option on my next nonfiction, so we're going to see what they say first. I sent them a proposal for another one a while ago that wasn't strictly Hawk. Hamilton style music. You want to see Johann Hawk rapping? My name is Johann, and I'm here to say I love swindling widows in a major way. I thought your name was Jacob. The guy occasionally did give his name as John Jacob Schmidt. There's such a John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt joke in there.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
Sorry, Gary, I missed everything other than that one troll and the guy who asked if I lived in the suburbs. No, I do not. I was in the West Loop for about 15 years. They priced me out of there. Though I did stop by the other day to get some sausage at Bari, which is possibly the hot sausage they sell at Bari is possibly the best food in Chicago. Thanks, Barb. Well, Johan, I ain't saying you a gold digger. Wait a minute, yes I am. Well, I don't know, you seldom swindled anybody who had that much money. Well, Jackie, I mean like the bulk sausage. They just pull you off coils of it. A hawk opera, I could see that.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking, and here's Helen Ward to tell you all about her. Trucking.
Thanks for coming with me, Sled and Kathy. Eleanor, yeah, I'm planning to do Find a Grave tomorrow. I'm going to find out in the morning if I can get my car out, but I think I can. I gotta go do some copy edit stuff on the Graceland book too. They sent me a few more queries. George, that's an excellent question. You know, Karen, it's weird to me how many more people comment on the Weasel Stomping Day reference than the Whacking Day reference. Megan, where I am, we got 6 to 8 inches, somewhere in there. Have a good night, Adam. Hey, have a good night, Sarah. See you on Whiskey and a Cookie tomorrow. Hopefully find a grave, too, if you can get out of work. How many occupants are in Trump Tower? Well, now that R. Kelly's gone. I know they've got a lot of empty space that they can't rent out in there, like the retail space. I'm glad to hear that, Kathy. Hey, have a good night, Lady Meow. Johan, I have more or less found your grave. I found your grave as close as it's coming anyway. I know what section you're in at Elmwood, but it's tricky. The rest of it is soldiers and Russians who died in the 1920s, so I think it's a little space you had all to yourself for a while there. But they couldn't really help me find the specifics of it. It was really like, here's the section, go find the grave. I was like, he's not going to be marked. Nobody paid to mark this guy. He wasn't nice. Have a good night, Chuck. Yeah, Marsha, I asked out loud, okay, Johan, where are you? And didn't hear like Strange Zither music playing or anything. Good night, Diane. Urban Legends Tour, that would be kind of fun. Jennifer, that's possible. They're all kind of unmarked, but I know they're scattered through different cemeteries. There's only so many of them buried in Chicago, and a lot of the ones that he didn't kill, I generally have no idea what became of them. Yeah, the Urban Legends, write it down. I will. Yeah. Yeah, just grab some chalk. Now, Jennifer, unmarked graves aren't nearly as uncommon as people think.
Benny Goodman and his orchestra, and here Helen Ward sing.
Now, we found a couple of them. We found, we found his last victim. The last one that he killed. Well, I found the last one that he killed is in Oak Woods, but they could only give me the section, not even like a general idea of where in the section she's going to be. I even asked, like, can you tell me, like, whereabouts she's going to be? And they just said, no. We did find the exact location of the one who was buried at Graceland's. That was hard. Jeff, yeah, I've done this for some corporate groups. So where is Miles? Let's go see. Miles? Oh, I see Miles. Hey. I called his name and he ran right over. Catch a kitty by the toe. If he hollers, let it go. Let it fly away. But yeah, the arsenic with which he killed those two graves that I've located in Chicago, the arsenic's probably still there. Assuming they were buried in a nice enough coffin. That's iffy. It's a very wet, marshy soil that probably dissipated into the soil if the coffin didn't pop up. Priya's walking across, making a move here too. Miles is so chill unless I'm trying to use my computer at the desk. Then he's got to hop up and up and up and up all the time. Have I ever seen what arsenic looks like? You know, I've never actually I don't know if I've ever seen arsenic in person.
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
I don't make it a point to handle every poison I write about or anything. Oh, thanks, Barb. Miles is a good boy. Yeah, aren't you, Miles? Good job. Gary, no, I'm not on the phone. Ooh, Kathy, that's rough. Have any of the cemeteries given up their dead? Lori, not that I know of. Problem is, they tend to decompose pretty quick here. I mean, Forest Home Cemetery was pretty flooded a couple of years ago, and I kept trying to get footage of Belle Gunnis' grave, and there'd be ducks swimming over it. Lauren, arsenic is an element that doesn't decompose. Yeah, Phoenix. I think it was mostly. It's often described as a white powder that people see people carrying. Marshall, lots of things probably do. People used to occasionally take it medicinally. You just can't take too much. Same thing with strychnine. Like there was a little bit of strychnine in John Ketchum, who we talked about this morning. But at the time, people were taking it, like, to increase vitality. Oh yeah, you could buy arsenic and say you were buying it for rats, easy. Like at the time Minnie Wallace was buying it to kill her first husband, there was a book where you were supposed to write your reason for buying it at the drugstore. She hadn't thought up a good enough lie yet, so she didn't put anything.
Portion of Benny Goodman's forthright invitation at the beginning of his program. Let's dance.
All right, folks, that's Benny wrapping up. And with Benny wrapping up, I think I will wrap up as well. So, quick plug for the upcoming events. Sunday morning, Insurrection, the Treason Tour. Haven't done that one in a while, but it seems awfully timely. And a week from tonight, no different time, we're going to do because I'm doing this for Chicagoans, their weekly series. But we'll do that at 7 p.m. next week. Lillian Colley and The Wind Blew In.
Benny Goodman and his orchestra from the Joseph Urban Room.
And of course, tomorrow is Find a Grave Friday, followed by Whiskey and a Cookie tomorrow evening. So we will see everybody tomorrow. Thanks for coming and hanging out with me tonight. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tour saying stay safe, stay strong, stay warm. But of course, everybody, stay spooky. Have a great night, everybody.